You ever wonder what really goes on behind the scenes of your favorite restaurants? Well, today's story is going to blow your mind. Imagine being the CEO of a successful diner chain, thinking everything's running smoothly. Until you walk into one of your own locations, undercover, and see a waitress crying in the back. What would you do? Ignore it? Fire someone? Or tear everything down and rebuild it from the ground up? This is a story about leadership, betrayal, and the moment one CEO decided to take back control. Trust me, you don't want to miss this one. Ethan Wallace had always taken pride in the success of Sunnybrook Diner, a chain he built from a small-town burger joint into a beloved regional restaurant. His goal had always been clear: great food, a welcoming atmosphere, and a workplace where employees felt valued. But lately, something felt off. The numbers told a worrying story. Sales were slipping, customer complaints were on the rise, and employee turnover was at an all-time high. The once loyal customers who raved about Sunnybrook's homey service were now leaving frustrated reviews about rude staff, slow service, and poorly prepared meals. Concerned, Ethan turned to his district manager, Grant, for answers. But Grant assured him everything was under control, blaming staffing shortages and high customer expectations for the dip in performance. Ethan wasn't convinced. If it were just a few bad weeks, he could understand. But this was a pattern. The reports on his desk didn't tell the full story, and he had a growing suspicion that the real problem lay in the leadership at certain locations. Then came an email that changed everything. A longtime customer, an elderly woman, shared how she had been ignored and brushed off when asking for assistance at one of his busiest diners. Her words hit harder than any financial report. Sunnybrook was supposed to be a place where everyone felt welcome, not dismissed. That was the final straw. Ethan decided he couldn't sit back any longer. If his managers weren't going to give him the truth, he would find it himself. With a messy beard, old hoodie, and glasses, Ethan prepared to step into one of his own diners, undercover. He needed to see what was really happening behind the counter and in the kitchen, and once he did, he'd make sure things changed. For good. Dressed in a faded hoodie, worn-out jeans, and glasses he never normally wore, Ethan Wallace stepped into Sunnybrook Diner as just another customer. The moment he walked through the door, he could feel that something was off. Instead of the warm, inviting atmosphere that had once defined his diners, there was a lingering tension in the air. The employees moved quickly, but there was no energy, no smiles, just rushed, robotic motion. A few tables had dirty dishes left untouched, and the line at the register stretched long, with frustrated customers shifting impatiently. At the front counter, a young waitress, Hannah, in her early 20s, approached with a forced smile. "Welcome to Sunnybrook. What can I get you?" she asked, her voice polite but noticeably tired. Ethan placed a simple order, a cheeseburger and fries, but couldn't help but notice the way her hands shook as she jotted it down. As he took a seat near the back, Ethan watched the diner in action. The kitchen was overwhelmed, orders piling up, while the manager, a tall man named Craig, stood with his arms crossed, barking orders but never lifting a finger to help. Employees flinched under his tone but said nothing. Then, just as Ethan was about to turn his attention back to his table, he saw something that made him pause. Hannah, gripping a tray, hurriedly slipped into the back room, shoulders shaking. Something wasn't right, and Ethan was about to find out exactly what was going on behind the scenes of his own diner. Ethan sat at his table, carefully observing the diner as the reality of its poor service and toxic work culture unfolded in front of him. The once vibrant and welcoming Sunnybrook Diner now operated like a machine running on empty, with employees barely keeping up and zero leadership support. The atmosphere was tense. There was no laughter, no casual chatter between the staff, just exhaustion and forced politeness. Customers waited far too long for their meals, and when they finally arrived, the plates were often incorrect or sloppily prepared. It didn't take long for Ethan to notice the biggest problem: Craig, the manager. Instead of leading by example, Craig stood near the front, watching but never helping. He barked orders, scolded employees, and ignored the growing chaos around him. Whenever a customer asked for assistance, he deflected, sending them to an already overworked server or rolling his eyes as if the request was a nuisance. When one customer politely asked for extra napkins, Craig simply gestured vaguely toward a station across the room without a word. Meanwhile, the employees bore the brunt of the dysfunction. Hannah, the waitress who had taken Ethan's order, was clearly running on fumes. She moved quickly between tables, trying to keep up, but Ethan could see the cracks forming. She wasn't just tired, she was on edge, almost fearful. Then came the moment that made Ethan's blood boil. A middle-aged customer at a booth raised his hand, trying to flag down an employee after waiting nearly 30 minutes for his food. Hannah, noticing him, rushed over to apologize. "I'm really sorry for the wait. Let me check on your order," she said, voice rushed but sincere. Before she could take another step, Craig's sharp voice cut through the room. "Hannah, are you just going to ignore table 5 all night?" he snapped. She flinched, face turning red. "I was just... Excuses don't serve food. Move faster, or don't bother showing up tomorrow." The customer, clearly uncomfortable, muttered, "Hey, it's not her fault," but Craig ignored him, turning away like nothing had happened. Ethan's hands curled into fists under the table. This wasn't just poor management, this was workplace bullying. And from the way the other employees avoided eye contact, it was clear this kind of treatment was normal here. Ethan had seen enough. The toxic culture of his diner wasn't an accident. It was being encouraged from the top down. And now that he had witnessed it firsthand, there was no way he was going to let it continue. The moment that shattered Ethan's patience came not long after Craig's public humiliation of Hannah. The dinner rush had just begun, and the tension in Sunnybrook Diner was suffocating. Customers grew impatient as they waited for their orders. The kitchen was overwhelmed, and the servers were scrambling to keep up with an impossible workload. Ethan, still undercover, watched as Hannah tried to juggle too many tables at once, her hands full with plates while her notepad was tucked into her apron. Then it happened. As she hurried past Craig to grab an order from the kitchen, she accidentally bumped into him. It was barely a nudge, nothing that should have even warranted a reaction. But Craig whipped around like she had committed some unforgivable offense. "Are you serious, Hannah?" he snapped, his voice cutting through the hum of the diner. "You can't even walk straight now?" "I'm sorry, she started, but he cut her off. "I don't want to hear it. Maybe if you spent less time daydreaming and more time working, we wouldn't have customers waiting half an hour for their food," he sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Ethan saw it. The slight tremble in Hannah's hands, the way her eyes darted to the floor like she had been trained to take the abuse in silence. But what happened next pushed him over the edge. Craig leaned in closer, voice lower but just as venomous. "If you can't handle a simple shift, maybe you should go find a job that doesn't require thinking." Hannah froze, blinking rapidly, trying to hold back tears. Without another word, she turned and hurried toward the back of the diner, disappearing into the employee break room. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had already seen how toxic Craig was as a leader, but this wasn't just mismanagement, it was cruelty. And the worst part? Nobody stood up for her. Other employees saw what happened, yet they kept their heads down, either too afraid to intervene or simply used to this kind of treatment. Ethan couldn't let this slide. Not anymore. Without hesitation, he got up from his seat and walked toward the break room. As he neared the door, he could hear quiet, muffled sobs from inside. Pushing it open gently, he found Hannah leaning against the sink, gripping the edges like it was the only thing holding her up. She gasped when she saw him. "Oh, I'll be out in a second," she said quickly, wiping at her eyes. Ethan shook his head. "Take your time," he said, his voice softer now. "But Hannah, this isn't okay." She let out a shaky breath, looking away. It doesn't matter. But it did. And Ethan was about to prove it to everyone. Ethan had seen enough. The toxic culture at Sunnybrook Diner wasn't just an issue. It was a complete failure of leadership. The way Craig had belittled Hannah, the way the staff operated in fear, the way customers were neglected while their concerns were brushed aside, it all pointed to one thing. The wrong person was in charge. With his mind made up, Ethan straightened his posture, pulled off his name tag, and stepped out onto the diner floor. No longer just another trainee, but the CEO of the very business Craig had been running into the ground. The moment he walked up to the counter, the entire diner seemed to fall into silence. Employees exchanged confused glances, sensing something had shifted. Customers, some of whom had witnessed Craig's earlier outburst, looked on with interest. And then there was Craig himself, standing with his arms crossed, looking irritated as Ethan approached. "What do you want, new guy?" Craig scoffed. "If you're going to quit, do it after the shift." Ethan let the words hang in the air for a moment before responding, his voice calm but filled with authority. "I'm not quitting, Craig." He took off his glasses and ran a hand through his hair, dropping the casual persona he had maintained. "I own this diner." Craig's smirk faltered. "What?" Ethan locked eyes with him. "I'm Ethan Reynolds, CEO of Sunnybrook Diners, and I've spent the last 2 days watching you mistreat your employees, ignore your customers, and run this place like a dictatorship instead of a team." The room was dead silent. Hannah, standing near the break room door, covered her mouth in shock. Other employees stiffened, glancing at one another. Craig's face went pale, then red with anger. I was just trying to keep things under control," he stammered. Ethan shook his head. "No, you were tearing it apart." Then, with unshakable finality, he said the words Craig never saw coming. "You're fired." With Craig gone, Ethan knew that firing one toxic manager wouldn't be enough to fix Sunnybrook Diner. The damage ran deeper than just one person. It was a broken system, a culture that had allowed mistreatment and neglect to thrive. That ended today. He turned to the employees who were still frozen in stunned silence. "Now that he's gone, let's talk about what's going to change," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. First, he addressed the staff shortage, which had been one of the diner's biggest problems. "Starting tomorrow, we're bringing in additional staff to lighten the workload. No one should be running an entire shift alone." A few of the cooks and servers exhaled in relief, their exhaustion finally being acknowledged. Then he turned to Hannah. "Hannah, you've shown real dedication despite the way you've been treated. I'm promoting you to shift supervisor, effective immediately." Hannah's eyes widened in shock. "Me?" she stammered. Ethan nodded. "You've been holding this place together while your manager tore it apart. That's what leadership actually looks like." The other employees nodded in agreement, some even smiling for the first time that day. Next, Ethan tackled the toxic work environment. "I don't want any of you to ever feel like you can't speak up. If there's a problem, I want to hear about it. Starting now, we're implementing an anonymous feedback system, so if you experience mistreatment, you can report it directly to the corporate without fear of retaliation." Finally, he addressed customer service. This diner was built to be a place where people feel welcome, customers and employees alike. No more ignoring customers, no more half-hearted service. From now on, we treat every person who walks in here with respect. The room felt different now, like a weight had been lifted. The employees weren't just hearing promises, they were seeing action. Ethan took a breath, looking around at his team. "This isn't just about fixing today's problems," he said. "This is about making sure they never happen again." And with that, the real work began. With immediate changes in place at Sunnybrook Diner, Ethan knew his work wasn't over. Fixing one location was just the beginning. If this diner had fallen into neglect, how many others were struggling under the same toxic leadership? The real challenge was fixing the entire company from the ground up. The first step was holding managers accountable. Ethan ordered a full company-wide audit, reviewing employee turnover rates, customer complaints, and management behavior at every location. Any manager found mistreating employees or neglecting customers would be removed immediately. No more excuses. No more unchecked authority. Next, he launched a leadership training program. "Being a manager isn't about barking orders," Ethan told his executive team. "It's about supporting your staff and ensuring they have what they need to succeed." Every manager would be required to complete customer service and employee relations training, and any who refused would be replaced. To address workplace morale, he implemented a company-wide employee feedback system where workers could report concerns anonymously. He also revised the staffing structure, ensuring every location had enough employees to handle peak hours without overworking their teams. No more single waitresses managing an entire floor. No more cooks running a kitchen alone. But the biggest change was restoring the company's core values. Ethan made it clear that Sunnybrook Diner wasn't just about selling food. It was about community, respect, and quality service. He revised customer service policies, ensuring that guests were always treated with kindness and efficiency. He also authorized store renovations, ensuring that every diner felt clean, inviting, and welcoming, just as he had envisioned when he started the business. Over the next few months, Ethan personally visited locations, meeting employees, listening to their concerns, and reinforcing the changes. Slowly but surely, the culture of fear and frustration was replaced with one of teamwork and respect. Employee satisfaction rose, customer complaints dropped, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt that his company was back on the right track. It wasn't just about saving a business, it was about rebuilding it the right way. A few months after implementing the changes, Sunnybrook Diner felt like a completely different place. What was once a tense, overworked, and toxic environment had transformed into a welcoming, team-oriented space where both employees and customers felt valued. Ethan Morgan walked into the diner, this time as its CEO, not an undercover observer. But the moment he stepped inside, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Smiles. Employees moved with energy and purpose, chatting with customers, supporting one another, and actually enjoying their work. Emily, now a shift supervisor, handled the floor with confidence, checking in on tables and helping the staff. The once overwhelmed kitchen crew worked efficiently, no longer struggling under impossible workloads. Even customers had noticed the shift, leaving positive reviews and commenting on how the diner felt like the old Sunnybrook again. As Ethan took a seat, he spotted a familiar face, an elderly regular who had stopped coming due to the poor service. The man smiled at his waitress and said, "Feels good to be back. You guys finally got it right." That single comment told Ethan everything he needed to know. He had set out to fix one failing restaurant, but in the process, he had restored the heart of his company. Sunnybrook Diner wasn't just surviving, it was thriving again. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan knew his father's legacy was safe in the right hands. The transformation of Sunnybrook Diner teaches a powerful lesson about leadership, accountability, and company culture. Ethan Morgan built his restaurant chain on quality service and respect, but over time, poor leadership and neglect eroded everything he worked for. It wasn't financial reports or executive meetings that showed him the truth. It was stepping into the daily lives of his employees that opened his eyes. The biggest takeaway? A business is only as strong as its people. Ethan learned that leaders who ignore their employees create environments of fear and frustration, which ultimately lead to high turnover, unhappy customers, and failing businesses. However, when workers feel valued, supported, and heard, they perform at their best, and customers notice the difference. Ethan didn't fix his company by simply firing bad managers. He rebuilt trust from the ground up. He created accountability, set clear expectations, and ensured that employees had the resources they needed. In the end, leadership isn't about power, it's about responsibility. True leaders don't just dictate from an office, they listen, take action, and create a culture where everyone thrives. Sunnybrook Diner didn't just recover, it became stronger than ever. And that's what real leadership is all about.